And now, WWOR-TV and the Asbury Park Press present the first official New Jersey gubernatorial debate. Debate 89, with moderator Roland Smith.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Monmouth College in West Long Branch, New Jersey. Tonight, the two major candidates for governor of New Jersey face each other in a live, state-mandated debate. To get public campaign money, both must take part in this debate. It is the first such gubernatorial debate under the new election laws. A candidate will have 90 seconds to answer a question from our panel of reporters. His opponent will have 60 seconds for a rebuttal. At the end of the debate, each candidate will have the opportunity to ask the other one a question. The candidates are Republican Congressman Jim Courter and Democratic Congressman Jim Florio. Our panel of reporters include Karen DeMasters from the Asbury Park Press, David Blomquist from the Record of Hackensack, and John McGowan from the Courier-Post in Camden County. Now, as a result of a coin toss, Congressman Florio gives his opening statement first. Congressman.
Good evening. I'd like to thank all who are responsible for tonight's opportunity to continue the conversation about who we trust to control and run New Jersey for the next 4 years. I've got a proven record of leadership on the issues that matter to New Jersey. My values are fixed. I've stood up to the polluters when I wrote the law to save our drinking water systems. I stood up to the automobile insurance companies when I said that we're going to roll back automobile insurance rates. I stood with the police when we said we're going to ban assault weapons and preserve the death penalty. There are some big differences between Jim Florio and Jim Courter, not just in what we say, but in what we do and what we've done. Jim Courter says he won't do anything to take away a woman's right to choose. But just a few months ago, he asked the Supreme Court to do just that. He says he wants to lead in the war on drugs, but he's voted against money for the Coast Guard, the FBI, the Customs Service. He says he's an environmentalist, but he's had toxic waste drums on his own property. And he wants you, the taxpayer, to pay to clean up waste, not the polluters. We'll be looking at all of these differences tonight and through the balance of the campaign.
Okay, Congressman Courter, your opening statement.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. This election is about where we stand as a state and where we stand as a people. It's about whether we stand for our families or whether we stand for special interests. It's about whether we stand for our children in our schools or the drug pushers and drug kingpins in their crack dens. It's whether we stand for automobile drivers who can hardly pay for their insurance, or whether we stand for special interests like the trial bar and the big insurance companies. There is differences between Congressman Florio and me. It's about whether we go forward or whether we go back, whether we build on the record of Governor Tom Kean or whether we tear it asunder. 8 years ago, my opponent ran against Tom Kean. He criticized him 8 years ago. He said that he was running for governor because he wanted to give Washington a message. He said he wanted to give Ronald Reagan, as a matter of fact, a punch in the mouth. That's what he said. Thank goodness he lost that election. Tom Kean won it. There's big differences between myself and Congressman Florio. He says that he wants to make sure that we're a better state. He says, on the other hand, that he wants to help the trial attorneys as well. There's differences between he and me. We come from different parts of the state. We have different ways of thinking. We have different approaches to problems. We come from totally different political outlooks. Thank you very much.
The first question tonight comes from Karen DeMasters of the Asbury Park Press. As a result of a coin toss, that question goes to Congressman Florio.
Thank you, Roland. Congressman Florio, when you're asked about balancing the state budget, you say that you want a financial audit, but at the same time you say we don't need any new taxes. If you don't know what an audit would show, how can you be sure that we don't need new taxes? And if you do know what an audit would show, isn't calling for one just a smokescreen to avoid answering the question?
Well, Karen, the obvious point that I start from is that revenues have not been the problem in the last couple of years in New Jersey. We have spent more money than we've ever spent in the history of the state. $6 billion was what the budget was up until 8 years ago. That's what it got. It took us to get 200 years to get to that point. Now, 8 years ago, or 8 years later, we've got a budget of $12 billion. So money has not been the problem. We've lifted every conceivable tax in the state of New Jersey. The problem is how it's spent, how it's allocated. What I'm suggesting is that it's been 20 years since anyone has looked at the governmental system that we have here. I'm saying it's long overdue. We've all talked in the campaign about the anecdotes. The $30 million worth of cars that we have, $55 million to plan on the turnpike for an expansion that wasn't ever used. What we're saying is that there's a need to go back to square one if you're going to have any credibility with the people of this state. We have lots of spending that's taken place, but I don't know anyone that thinks their property taxes are lower or that we're getting more efficiency out of government. Use one example, DEP. The budget has gone up 300%. Anyone feel 3 times as environmentally safe now as we were 8 years ago? I don't think so. We've got to go back and find out where the money went.
Time is up. Congressman Corter, your rebuttal.
Well, it's really quite amazing that Congressman Florio should talk about being concerned about where money is spent. I remember in Washington for years, we overlapped about 10 years. He constantly voted against caps on spending, constantly voted against line item vetoes, constantly voted against giving the president a balanced budget in the Constitution in order to get some discipline. If there's an individual on this stage that likes to spend money and likes to raise taxes, it's him, not me. That's the bottom line here. The bottom line is having a record that you can be proud of, having something you can point to. It's one thing to run for governor and say that I'm going to not raise taxes, but we have to look at an individual's record. 5 times he raised taxes, always fighting against the type of discipline we need in Washington, D.C. And if he becomes governor of the state of New Jersey, he'll fight against that same type of discipline that we need in the state of New Jersey.
Remind the audience that applause is not necessary nor required this evening. It may take time away from your candidate. Dave Blomquist from The Record with a question for Congressman Corter.
Congressman, you have 2 daughters in or nearing their teenage years, and I'm sure you and your wife have many friends with teenage children. Suppose one of your closest friends told you that his 15-year-old daughter had become pregnant from a boy at school. What would you advise them to do, and specifically, would you advise them to consider an abortion?
I suppose I'd give that father and that family the same advice that I would give my own daughter. I suppose that's a very personal question. I'd first tell him to tell her that he loved her, that he would support her, that he would always be there next to her and by her side as I would with both my 2 daughters. That's the most important thing. Mistakes do happen. I'd then tell him exactly what I tell my daughter and say, sweetheart, if it's a rape or if it's something else along those lines, you have every right to get an abortion. I would also urge her and ask her if she could do it to bring the child to term, because it is a life and I believe that. But I'd also tell her that we do have a constitution in the state of New Jersey and she can talk to others and she has options. But I guess the bottom line is the fact that I'd ask her to try adoption, and I'd also to let her know that I loved her dearly and would support whatever decision she came up with.
Congressman Florio, your rebuttal.
This is a fundamental value question. Jim, since we've been in this campaign on this issue, has literally been a walking weather vane, changing from moment to moment on his view on the basic question: who is it that has the right to choose? In my opinion, it's the woman that has the right to choose. I would respect Jim a bit more if he said the same thing he's been saying straight through the course of his career. It's not that long ago. As I said, months ago, he asked the Supreme Court to overturn that right. A few weeks ago, he voted to deny funds for an abortion, even to save the life of a mother. And that's truly a radical position. And I guess what we expect in this campaign is not people trying to game out where the politics lie on these very fundamental issues. You've got to be straightforward. I think the woman has the right to choose. He does not.
Time is up. Now, John McGowan from the Courier-Post with a question for Congressman Florio.
Congressman, the state Supreme Court today heard arguments on a case that could conceivably cost the state $500 million to $1 billion, not anecdotal tens of millions. Where would that money come? Where would the money come to pay for that?
You about the school financing?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the school financing responsibilities fit right into all of the other essential services that the state is supposed to be providing to our communities and to our school boards. The dilemma is that over the last 8 years, in new revenues alone, John, we have raised something like $20 billion. $2 billion of that money was supposed to go back to our communities for education, for police services, for things of that sort. As a result of that not happening, we have had in different communities property tax increases that have gone up in some astronomically. Average property tax increase across this state in the last 8 years is 122%. If the money that was supposed to have gone to our communities had not been siphoned off into those other things that we talked about, 1,200 new managers at the state government level, all of the other things that we've documented through the course of this campaign, the property tax increase would be 7%. When you get to the local level, if the state doesn't help, it hurts. And if the state doesn't help, then the school board people, the mayors, they go and make the decision. Do you cut the services, the educational quality, or do you lift the property taxes? What they've done is to lift the property taxes. We can go back and change the priorities, get the monies from the state that was supposed to be funding these programs, and that somehow got siphoned off to somewhere else.
Congressman Corder, your rebuttal.
Yes, John, what I want to do is to make sure that we reinstate the cap on most of state spending. That cap was lifted in 1983. Had that cap been in there, we'd have about $3 billion of additional spending we could spend for schools and towards efforts to lower property taxes. I think that is important. But when we talk about our schools in the state of New Jersey, I think it's also important to recognize that Governor Tom Kean has massively increased the amount of funding that they've received, from $1.8 billion to $3.6 billion. In the state of New Jersey, 10 years ago, we used to spend $3 billion for education in the state. Now that's up to $8 billion, all the while enrollments have gone down by about 30%. So as much as I'm in favor of, yes, making sure that we spend a little bit more on education, let's keep in mind we have to spend that money wisely, properly. That's why I credit Governor Tom Kean with all the new educational reforms, so we get really more education out of the dollars we put in. That's important.
Now we go back to Karen DeMasters. She has a question for Congressman Corder.
Congressman Corder, a governor has to know how to choose a competent staff and delegate authority. Given the problems that you've had with your campaign staff and the resignations of the high-level members, why should the public think you'd be any better at organizing an administration and running the state?
First, let me say that I think my campaign has done a very good job. I know that Ronald Reagan had real problems when he was running in 1980 and he won. He had problems with his campaign. George Bush had problems with his campaign and he won handily in 1988. Second, let me just say the following, that the people of the state of New Jersey don't vote for campaigns. They vote for candidates. And the best candidate's sitting here. It's not sitting over there. Thirdly, let me say this. You know, you have a point. There is a difference between his campaign and mine. I pay my campaign manager $50,000 a year. He pays his campaign manager $180,000 a year. He's got 22 people working at his campaign. I have 11 working in mine. Do you think we'll be able to, how much money is he, if he becomes governor of the state of New Jersey, going to want to pay his cabinet? If he pays his campaign manager $180,000, how many people are we going to have in the state of New Jersey working if he needs twice as many people than me to run a campaign? So your question is a good one, and the answer is better.
Congressman Florio, your rebuttal.
Well, it's kind of interesting, talking about big spenders. In Washington, Jim Corder is the ultimate big spender. He's been cutting monies for childhood immunization programs, but is the big supporter of a $3.8 billion nerve gas program. He has a package of bills that will provide for the immediate deployment of Star Wars, a 5-year cost of $120 billion. What we're talking about is lots of money. When he talked before about not raising taxes, check it out. 1982, biggest tax increase in the history of the nation, $98 billion. He voted yes, I voted no.
Now we go to Dave Blomquist with a question for Congressman Florio.
Congressman, you have been asked many times in this campaign about business deals in which two of your closest friends pocketed hundreds of thousands of dollars from Camden County government. And to my knowledge, you've never said whether you think what they did was right or wrong. So I ask tonight, were the things that Joe Salima and Nick Rudy did in Camden right or wrong?
The things that were done were in accordance with the existing law. What I'm suggesting is that there's a new level of expectation that the people of this state, in every county, and in the state government most assuredly, are entitled to. I've spelled out my ethical program that's going to stop revolving door politics in every county and in the state government, that's going to stop no-bid contracts in every county and in the state government. My program has been editorially commented upon in a very favorable way. Jim Cotter has put forward nothing. And what I'm suggesting is that if we're talking about ethics, I'm the one that has made full disclosure. Newspapers didn't have to browbeat me into doing these things. I'm the one that's turned loose and made public my income tax returns. Jim Cotter has not seen fit to do that. No one has accused me of using my public office for private dollar gain. And what I'm suggesting to you is that I'm prepared to make sure that we have this new level of ethical propriety across the state in the proposal that I've put forward, and we can do much of it in an executive order, which I intend to do.
Congressman Cotter, before your rebuttal, we have made provisions for a follow-up question, and Mr. Blomquist has signaled me, so you have a follow-up question.
With all due respect, Congressman, my question was, were the things that Joe Salima and Nick Rudy did in Camden right or wrong?
I think they were not illegal, they were not unethical, but I think that there's a new expectation. Business as usual is no longer acceptable. Business as usual has to change. I'm prepared to lead the change.
Congressman Cotter, your turn for rebuttal.
They were wrong. They were wrong. And let me say, before you're so flippant with your comments, Jim, I wasn't in a Reader's Digest article written up with just 5 members about how to get rich in Congress. You were there. You were there with Jim Wright, and you were there with others. I've never had a home newspaper say there's an ethical cloud over my candidacy. I didn't have a leading person in my own party saying I was the boss of a corrupt county. Jim, so don't throw stones if you live in a glass house. That's all I can say.
John McGowan now with a question for Congressman Cotter.
Congressman, you often say it's been proven that you don't solve the problems of the cities by throwing money at them. With the HUD scandal, which cost you 2 political advisors and found well-connected people in position to intercept, do you think now that the money wasn't just being thrown far enough?
I think money's important to solve problems. I'm not sure whether the question has to do with HUD or whether it has to do with our cities. I'll take it both ways. One of my closest friends in the entire world is now in charge of HUD, Secretary Kemp. I believe deeply that he'll get to the bottom of the problems. I believe deeply that he'll set standards that are important to make sure that taxpayers' money is not wasted. I believe deeply that he'll make sure that the housing and urban development organization that he's the head of will spend money in such a way that individuals can live in good housing in the United States. If the question has to do with housing in our inner cities, let me ask it this way, or answer it this way. We can do more, but money alone is not the problem. The state of New Jersey's budget's gone up from $6 billion to $12 billion. What we have to do is utilize efforts like Governor Tom Kaine's tried, like Jack Kemp has proposed, like George Bush is proposing, and that is enterprise zones in our cities. to make sure that jobs are created, opportunities are created. What I want to do as well is to get that concept of enterprise zones and use it to create urban housing zones. And that would be important, to make sure that private enterprises uses the incentives to build homes in our cities, places where people can sleep, places where people can play. Cities not only should be places for commerce and recreation, but places in which we can live as well.
Congressman Florio, your rebuttal.
Jim knows all about enterprise. He should, as a land developer who's been doing very well over the last 10 years. I didn't become a multimillionaire in Congress. It's not me that's out there being sued for fraud. It's not me that is someone who has toxic waste dumps on the land, and the state is required to call me in and tell me to clean them up. I think what we're talking about is integrity in government across the board and the record, whether it be in the area of housing, whether it be in the area of urban affairs. It's interesting that the mayors of the big cities that need assistance have looked at my record, I've looked at his record, and come in and say there's no comparison. I wasn't cutting UDAG grants, community development block grants. All of those programs that are essential to rebuild our cities have been on Jim Corder's hit list.
Time is up. Karen DeMasters, you have a question for Congressman Florio.
Yes, Congressman Florio, you support the death penalty. There was a 1987 Stanford Law Review study that showed that 350 people, innocent people, were sentenced to death in the United States since 1900, and 23 of those were executed before their innocence was discovered. Is it worth the life of an innocent person to execute a guilty one?
Karen, it's a fundamental philosophical question. I happen to be from the Old Testament school. If you take someone's life, you put your own in jeopardy. Now, I respect the views of those on the opposite side of that. I think it's something that is a deterrent. I think the jury system in this country is a good system. But that doesn't mean we throw out the Constitution. That doesn't mean that we just pay no attention to due process. Jim Corder says that, no, we don't want to go and run through the appeal process. What we have to do is change it so we can have the death penalty opposed. He and I agree with each other in one respect. We both want the death penalty. I want to allow people to have fair trials first. He doesn't seem to be committed to that basic principle. His approach of changing and modifying is going to ensure that no one is going to be executed after due process takes place for another 10 years at least. My position on the death penalty is shared by Tom Kean, the Attorney General, all 21 prosecutors, the state police. It's something that is fundamental in terms of where you've come down, for or against. But if you come down for the death penalty, you ought to have some minimal commitment to the constitutional process of due process to all.
Now, Congressman Corder with his rebuttal.
Congressman Florio does not have an admirable record when it comes to crime, fighting crime in the United States of America, or fighting crime in the state of New Jersey. He has voted against raising penalties for narcotic possession. When he was in the legislature, voted in favor of permitting criminals the right to vote, in making sure that those individuals could have their records be expunged so they could lie when they tried to seek a job. He voted against changing of the laws so we could make sure that drug sellers and kingpins could not possibly get out on a technicality. As a matter of fact, there's another interesting article I might point out later with respect to that. Well, obviously, on the death sentence, he's not in favor of a death sentence. I am. The point to keep in mind is that in the state of New Jersey, 14 times in a row, the Supreme Court of this state has said that the death penalty is going to be reversed. He's in favor of what we have. What we have is a paper tiger. I want to make sure it's a real deterrent.
Dave Blomquist with a question now for Congressman Corder.
Congressman, there was an uproar in Washington this summer when a leading museum sought to use federal grants for an exhibit that included explicit homosexual photographs. What would you do as governor if the State Museum or the State Council on the Arts wanted to use taxpayer dollars for such an exhibit?
Let me say, first of all, I want to congratulate Governor Tom Kean because art is very important. Before he became governor, we were spending about $3 million. $3 million. Now we're spending about $20 million. States and governors should be concerned about art, and I think the state of New Jersey has an appropriate place. I am frankly not necessarily, nor is anybody, the judge of what is art, what is good or what is bad. The United States Supreme Court has said that if it violates the definition of pornography, then it's not art. So therefore, if it is by the court's definition pornography, it is not protected by the First Amendment of the United States Supreme Court, by the First Amendment of the Constitution, or by the courts. But as governor of the state of New Jersey, I will not put myself in the position of making that determination. I agree with free artistic expression. The courts determine whether something is pornographic and when it is not. It's not up to the determination of the governor.
Dave, you have a follow-up question?
No,
okay.
go ahead.
Congressman Florio, your rebuttal.
Well, Jim Cotter apparently is up to some determinations. He made the determination that an avowed homosexual, however one determines that one is avowed or not, is not entitled to work in certain occupations. That was perhaps the lowest point of this campaign in terms of the sense that there's something amiss in value systems. Gratuitous gay bashing is not something that is good for anywhere. It certainly is not good in New Jersey. People that try to make points out of that sort of thing are certainly people that have values that are out of step with most people. The worst part of it was then to say that you didn't agree with what you had previously said, and then to deny that you said it in the first place, even though it was captured on television. There are fundamental values involving not only honesty, but human rights and civil rights that were put in question as a result of that whole episode.
Remind the audience again to please refrain, if you can, from spontaneous outbursts. Now, Congressman Florio takes a question from John McGowan.
Congressman, why do you think you can succeed where others have failed in lowering auto insurance rates without limiting its availability?
Yeah, because, John, I understand automobile insurance. I've spent 2 years in Washington learning about, first of all, the lunacy of New Jersey's system. We have a JUA system that has 53% of our drivers who are categorized as bad drivers. Every other state in the union has only 4 to 6% of their drivers in a bad driver fund. The plan that Jim Cotter is pushing, deregulation, letting the drivers of the insurance companies of this state do whatever they want to do, has in fact been repudiated by everybody. Tom Kaine, this administration, all of his Republican challengers in the primary ridiculed it as effectively a giveaway to the automobile insurance industry. I know what it is that we have to do, and I am going to be able to mobilize people around the basic proposition that if the insurance industry ripped us off for $1 billion, which a state audit just said, they should kick back into the fund so that we don't have to pay the 20% of our rate that we are currently paying to pay off that fund. And that's just something that's just so basic. It's a hard thing to understand why Jim Cotter would be saying, turn the insurance companies loose. Trust them. They'll do things for us. They'll do things for us, but it will not be anything that we like.
We now go to Congressman Cotter for a rebuttal.
Obviously, Congressman Florio doesn't understand his own role in raising automobile insurance rates in the state of New Jersey. He voted for the $200 threshold years ago that the New York Times very recently editorialized Jim saying that was the root of the problem. A number of years ago, he advocated the creation of the JUA. I want to get rid of the JUA. I want to make sure that good drivers don't subsidize bad drivers. I want to make sure that we get government out and competition in. I want to make sure as far as I'm concerned, we should have an administration in the state of New Jersey that forces insurance companies to compete one against the other, that offers a good product at a reasonable price in a competitive market. He doesn't understand competition. He's part of the problem. I'm part of the solution. Vote for Jim Cotter. You'll be able to smile when you drive again in the state of New Jersey.
Karen DeMasters, your turn to ask a question of Congressman Cotter.
Congressman Cotter, you boast that you're an environmentalist. If that's true, why is it that every environmental group that rates members of Congress gives you poor ratings? It can't be just because of a few no votes on spending packages for environmental projects, can it?
I have a very good environmental record, and the first thing I want to do in my allotted 90 seconds, Congressman Florio said that I had a toxic waste dump on my property. That's got to be the old, good, positive Jim Florio talking, obviously. What we're talking about here is a midnight dumper trespassed on property owned by me and my brother and had some home heating oil, which was cleaned up. I have a letter from DEP. So I cleaned up and didn't pollute, Jim. I know you're having fun with that, but I guess that's your style and your technique. I'm proud of the fact years ago that I voted in favor of and introduced legislation to stop oil and gas dumping off the New Jersey shore. I've constantly voted to make sure that we stop the sludge dumping. I voted in favor of Superfund. As a matter of fact, the first Superfund site in the state of New Jersey to be cleaned up was cleaned up in my congressional district, not Jim Florio's, but my congressional district. I also might add that I was a chief sponsor of a bill a little while ago to ban all oil and gas dumping off, oil and gas exploration off the New Jersey coast. I'm still waiting for Congressman Florio to sponsor that legislation. My record is excellent. I'm proud of my record. It's a good record. And I want to make sure that we continue the work of cleaning up our environment, making sure that our waters are clean so we can fish, so we can breathe properly, and we can enjoy the nature that is so important for all of us.
Congressman Florio, your rebuttal.
Come here, break. I mean,
I was trying to.
environment, an expert on Star Wars, an expert on nerve gas, but not the environment. The people in his district had to call me to get some action on the dump site that was up there. I mean, he has voted to lower standards for effluent and wastewater that's going into the ocean that's treated by sewage plants. He has voted to take away the opportunity for people to get alternative drinking water supplies. It has not even been a passive role. It's been an active role. He voted against making the polluters pay to clean up these sites, wants the taxpayers to pay. Jack Kemp said his proposal was the equivalent of a sales tax for all of us. It's really strange.
Time is up. We now go to David Blomquist of the Record of Hackensack for a question to Congressman Florio.
Congressman, under New Jersey's current law, possession of 50 grams or less of marijuana is a disorderly persons offense, meaning it's technically not a crime and is punishable mostly by a modest fine. In these times when we're encouraging our children to just say no to drugs of any kind, do you think it's time to toughen up the penalties on marijuana?
David, that is an offense for which you can go to jail. 6 months in jail is what you can get for the possession of even minuscule amounts. I think that's fair when you're talking about very, very small amounts. What is not fair is what Jim Cotter wants to do, is to have a two-tier system to allow, and this was the Ed Meese proposal, to allow the prosecutor to have discretion to be able to pick or choose whether you go criminally or civilly. If you go civilly, if the prosecutor says you're okay, you come from a nice town, I guess, we're going to just give you a fine. The fine can be anywhere from $0 to $10,000. On the other hand, for the same offense, the prosecutor can say, well, no, we're going to charge you with a crime, and you're going to go to jail. That's a system of justice that I don't subscribe to. Administrative penalties of this sort really is the first step to legalizing drugs. At this point, I think that's entirely the wrong direction. We should be dealing with casual users in the same way that we deal with anyone else. A two-tier system of justice that Jim Cotter wants is not acceptable.
Congressman Cotter, your rebuttal.
Congressman Florio, as I said before, doesn't have a good voting record when it comes to crime in the state of New Jersey. Years ago, when he was in the legislature, as I mentioned before, he voted to make sure that criminals had the right to vote. He introduced legislation to make sure that their records could be expunged and could be sealed, so when they applied for a job, they could lie and get away with it. There was an interesting article in the September issue of Reader's Digest saying the law that criminals love. That was the type of law that was sponsored by Congressman Florio when he was in the legislature. When it comes to making sure that those people who perpetrate serious crimes can't get off on a technicality, and they lean on the types of votes that he's cast in Washington, weak on crime, that we have changed as a society. We have to make sure that our laws are consistent, they're tough, and that those people that deserve to be put behind bars cannot get out on a simple technicality.
Time is up. We go now to John McGowan, the Courier-Post in Camden County, for a question to Congressman Corder.
Congressman, you recently stood in the center of a city slum and said people don't want to live like this. What would you do as governor to hasten planning and zoning reform to find room for the poor in wealthy suburban or ex-urban communities such as those in your district?
I want to make sure that New Jersey is a New Jersey for all of us. We have about 8 million people in the state of New Jersey. Right now, according to most estimates, we need about 145,000 new affordable houses in this state. That's a tremendous sum of new houses that have to be constructed. The problem is the fact that there's an insufficient number being constructed because the incentives are not there. I'm in favor of adopting a state plan that would encourage infrastructure development to make sure that we can redevelop our cities. I want to make sure that municipalities like those in my congressional district contribute to their fair share. And if they want to sell the sum of money to a bank and that bank be utilized for borrowing so the homes can be built in a different part of the state of New Jersey, that's one way to fulfill their commitment. As I said before, I wanted to make sure that we use different types of approaches to build housing in the state of New Jersey, irrespective of where that is. We want to marshal private enterprise. We want to change the regulations. There was an interesting article and study done not long ago saying that one of the reasons we have to build so many new houses, one of the reasons we have to make sure that there's a new supply of homes is the regulations. 30% of the cost of a new construction is regulation. I want to make sure we take an axe to those regulations so we can have homes for the people of the state of New Jersey.
Congressman Florio, your rebuttal.
Well, if any of the people in those cities read Jim Corder's record, they're not going to feel very good about the prospects of his assistance. Whether it be the senior citizens, when they see the 8 or 9 times he cut Social Security and Medicare, whether it be the children who are going to have less of a nutritional lunch program if he has his way, whether it be the policemen who have now looked at his record and say if you want someone to be on your side in taking assault weapons out of circulation in the cities, you better be for Jim Florio. As a matter of fact, the statewide Fraternal Order of Police have made that decision, and that's particularly interesting in light of the things that you heard here today. We can go down the list of all of the people who have a piece of the prosperity that should be New Jersey's for everyone, have not had a friend when it comes time to making decisions in Jim Corder. That he has made some priorities, it's true, but they haven't been for people.
Time is up. Karen DeMasters of the Asbury Park Press, a question for Congressman Florio.
Congressman Florio, you were given substantial interest in 2 real estate deals in Camden County by political friends. Before you announced that you would run for governor, you divested yourself of these interests and gave the money to Trenton State College. If you felt you had to sell these in order to run for governor, why did you accept them in the first place?
Well, first of all, Karen, I wasn't given anything. Those were business transactions. I borrowed the money, the same as if you bought a car. You borrow the money and you pay it back and you make an investment. I decided to give the money to Trenton State College because I thought it was something not only I wanted to do, but so as to remove any question with regard to appearances. That's why I've turned loose everything that I have. My wife and I have turned loose all that we have earned in terms of reporting on. Incidentally, everything we have is worth less than one of the defense contractor stock accounts that Jim Corder has. We have also turned loose and made public our income tax. We have said that's essential. Everything everyone knows about my affairs are because I told people. It wasn't newspaper investigations that had to root out everything about things that I'm doing. And I guess it's important for Jim Corder to make the decision. Does he want to restore confidence in the process that allows people to know where you get your money and how it is you earn? He hasn't turned loose to this point his income tax. I've pledged to do it every year, and I'm going to do it. I think we deserve an answer from Jim as to why he refuses, categorically and arbitrarily, to turn loose the income tax. I think I know, but I think it's important for him to tell us why he doesn't turn it loose.
Congressman Corder, your rebuttal.
I think we ought to know from Congressman Florio why he doesn't put his assets in a blind trust. Why don't you? I think I know. But I'd like to find out why you don't want to do it. Secondly, on that Continental Bank deal, I think it was, you said you borrowed money. I looked at the transaction. You got something worth $50,000 and didn't put up a nickel. Not a nickel. You got something for free. You were just cut. As a matter of fact, there was an interview asking one of your best friends, and he said, well, we just wanted to cut Jim Florio on a good deal. That's simply what it was. And talking about newspaper investigations, you didn't come forward with that. I remember I read the King James series, where they had an investigative reporter poring over your book, saying there was an ethical cloud over your conduct. I remember that. Why don't you put your stuff in a blind trust like me, like Tom Kane? That's the proper thing to do.
That ends the questioning from our panel of reporters, gentlemen. I commend you both for keeping to time. These next two questions will be different from the ones you have been asked up to now. They are designed to let the audience see beyond the professional practice persona. You may listen with your intellect, but we ask that you respond with your heart. To you, Congressman Corter, your house is burning, everyone is safe, you are able without harm to go back inside and save one item. What is it, and why is it of value to you?
I would take a picture of my mother and father, I suppose, out of the house. My mother's gone now. She wrote on the back of it. She was a model for me. Years ago, she entered the Ziegfeld Follies. She danced, she sang. She gave that up to get married. She raised myself and my brother. She was one of the first female entrepreneurs in the state of New Jersey, opening a medical laboratory, keeping us, I guess, in food while my father was starting a company. She had a good, full life, sacrificed so much for my brother and me. And I suppose the thing that I would take out of that house would be the picture of her and my father when she wrote a couple of personal messages on the reverse side of it. She was a great woman, and my father was a great man. He started with nothing, worked very hard, established himself in a profession, and I suppose the reason I'm in public service, which is the reason I guess I would want that particular picture, because he said on the back of it that I was supposed to do something for others, that I had a responsibility to contribute to society. I guess that's the reason I went into the Peace Corps. I guess that's the reason I worked for legal services. I guess that's the reason I'm a member of Congress.
Congressman Florio, since you've had a moment to think about that question, you have the normal rebuttal time, which is 60 seconds to answer.
Well, I guess all of the points that Jim Corter made are certainly laudable and commendable. And I guess to say those things is very important, and I'm sure it may be sincere. But what we're talking about is priorities. When we talk about serving people, we've got to make choices. That's what this is all about. And I guess my record in Washington has been one that's been designed to really serve people, provide them clean water, clean air, one that tries to provide job opportunities for people. And I guess all I would ask people to do is do some comparison shopping in this election. See who it is that's been out there working for people, particularly people in New Jersey, and who it is that's had different priorities. Different priorities, maybe commendable priorities, but not priorities that deal with the senior citizens' concerns, not priorities that can deal with the children's concerns. I think the decisions that we make reflect who it is we are.
Time is up, Congressman, and I now have the question to you, Congressman Florio. You may go back to any time in history. You may not return. You take with you only what you know today. Where would you go, and who would you influence?
I'm a bit of a student of history, and one of the most intriguing times, as far as I'm concerned, is the reformist age in the 1912, Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson. That period of time was a time that we first started building into our governmental system a sense of participatory democracy. It was the time when people looked for, they started the primary process, was initiated about that time. There was an effort by leaders. Robert La Follette was someone who was very well known, who said there was a need for democracy, if it was going to work well, to fold people into the process. Big institutions, the trusts, they were not going to be allowed to continue to dominate people's lives. And those people, they were called trust busters in some respects, Theodore Roosevelt, La Follette, Wilson, they set us on a different path. I like to think that we've been true to that. Sometimes we've varied a little bit. But I guess as governor, what I want to do is to be true to that commitment to make sure that people at the grassroots level are involved at all times in our process. Environmentally, I've tried to do that, and with some success. We've been able to get the big people to respond to the little people with things like the right to know, letting people know what's going on in their communities. I think that's the commitment that I would have out of that period of history.
Congressman Corder, you've had the time to think about the answer to going back into history. You have 60 seconds to answer.
I suppose I would go to Neville Chamberlain and say, listen to Winston, because he's right. 22 million lives would be saved. Children being taken and experimented upon in concentration camps, that would be all avoided. Democracies would have been able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on good things, on roads, on education, on nourishment, rather than bombs, rather than gas chambers. That's what I would do. On reflection, I'd go back and try to use the knowledge that I had today to prevent that war. Congressman Florio can criticize my goal to have a strong national security, but I'm proud of it. He can say that I voted for chemical weapons, but he doesn't understand I voted to cut them. I think freedom and democracy is important and should be cherished. That's what I would do.
This is one debate where not only journalists get to ask some of the questions, each candidate will now be able to ask his opponent one question. As with the other questions, there will be a rebuttal. A coin toss has determined that Congressman Florio asks the first question. Congressman.
Jim, you've tried to make much of you being an environmentalist. I guess what I'd like to do is just give you the opportunity to share with us your rationale for some of the votes. We talked earlier about the whole question that lowering standards for ocean emissions, that doesn't make any sense. We've closed a lot of our beaches this year with the standards being what they were. To lower them would be something that is not acceptable. The one I guess I would like to ask you to focus on is the one about drinking water. Because in New Jersey, it's not an academic problem. It's a real problem. We have towns where people literally are on bottled water. You voted against allowing alternative drinking water systems to be available to people who have lost their water out of toxic waste. Why?
That's not true, Jim. As a matter of fact, in my part of the state of New Jersey, I mentioned to you earlier in the debate, there was Kersawati Farm there. They needed, in fact, the first reason that they were concerned about a toxic waste dump, the first one in New Jersey to be cleaned up, by the way, in my congressional district, the reason that they were concerned about it was the fact that their drinking water was not pure, and the fact that they got rashes when they were taking showers. So I struggled, I worked, I made sure that they had an alternate water supply. No, Jim, I am a person that is concerned about people's pocketbooks. You're not. You're one of the great big spenders in Washington. Every taxpayer's organization in America says you're a big spender. In the past, a number of years, since 1980, you've voted to increase taxes 5 times. I voted to reduce them 3 times. Every time I voted yes to decrease a tax, you voted no. Every time I voted against increasing a tax, you voted the other way around. So you're absolutely wrong. I am as concerned as anybody else with the quality of water, the goodness of the earth. I have a record that I'm proud of.
Congressman Florio, you have the opportunity to rebut your own question.
The spending, yeah. $275 billion worth of new spending proposals were supported by you in the last 10 years. I voted for 1/5, $42 billion worth of new spending proposals in that period of time. Over and above that, the reductions that you've been advocating have been reductions on the taxes of the people at the very top. I mean, it's an interesting game. You lift everybody's, and then you take care of some folks. It's a shell game that unfortunately is being perpetrated against average people in this nation. It's a shell game that I'm not going to play because it's fixed. And that's a very, very terrible, sad thing to be doing to people.
Congressman Corder, it is now your turn to ask your opponent a question.
I hardly believe that he called me a big spender, but I guess that's what he did. Let me ask you this question. There is a Reader's Digest article that I read. It's not the one that you're thinking of. It's one that I read just last night, the October edition. The article had to do with the following. It said, why are we losing? Is that over for me already?
No, your question should be shorter, sir.
Okay. Why are we, his was pretty long. Why are we losing the war on drugs? And it said because people are getting out of by technicalities, getting out of real offenses. Why did you vote against amending the exclusionary rule so drug kingpins could go free on a technicality?
It's interesting. This is fundamental, and I hope everyone pays attention. What Jim is advocating, and the police don't even want this. Yeah, he's advocating the authority for policemen, if they wanted to kick down people's doors and conduct illegal, warrantless searches. The Fraternal Order of Police listened to both of us, came away with the impression that this is strange. This is not something we do in this country. This is not something that we work at avoiding this in this country. Yeah. We have the opportunity within due process to provide to our police the assistance that they need. First of all, take the assault weapons out of the hands of drug dealers, and you will provide for the safety of our policemen to do their jobs. Police do not want to be conducting illegal, warrantless searches. That's the vote you're talking about. That is something that I make no apologies for not supporting, and it is something that is just at odds with the ethical due process values of this country. And I think that's a commentary on a whole set of values. The government is going to take away a woman's right to choose if you prevail. Yeah. We're going to have a situation where homosexuals will not be able to work, and then we will have police authorized to kick down doors. I think that says something about values.
Congressman Porter. Jim? Congressman Porter, you may rebut your own question.
Yes. Thank you, Jim. You just simply don't understand. That article, you are talking in terms of an individual who had $37,000 on him, had 11 weapons, a silencer, 3 pounds of cocaine, and they had the officers in total good faith arrested that individual. And you voted twice, not just once, but twice, to make sure that that honest evidence couldn't be used. And you can't tell me police officers side with you on that issue. They side with me. Governor Tom Kean sides with me. Most people in the state of New Jersey side with me. Governor Tom Kean said quite some time ago in his book, The Politics of Inclusion, on page 44, that you, 44, look at it, that on these issues, you come out of the time of the 1960s. You're a 1960s liberal, Jim. You're not consistent with the positions of the people of the state of New Jersey. You've been soft on crime. You've allowed people like that to vote, to get out of jail early, and not to be brought to justice. That is simply wrong.
Why is the FOP supporting me?
Gentlemen, that ends the question that each gets to ask the other. Now each candidate has 2 minutes in which to wrap up a closing statement. By a coin toss, Congressman Corder has chosen to go last, so we start with you, Congressman Florio.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone. This election is about choices, and that's good because being governor is about choices. And I've tried to be honest and clear. I'm not flip-flopping in this whole race. But I think the people are entitled to that, and they're entitled to it from Jim Corder. Jim Corder says that he's not going to take away a woman's right to choose, and yet we know what it is that he's been advocating. He says that he is willing to stand up for drivers, and yet he appears to be capitulating to the automobile insurance companies. We have all of these things occurring, and yet we have nothing that is demonstrating that he's prepared to be on our side. Now, this is a very important election. I have a vision that I want for New Jersey. It's a vision where we don't have automobile insurance, that's just one more unfair tax on hardworking people. It's a vision where we can have children going to schools and be exposed to a good education, not a drug dealer in the backyard. It's a vision where we can have young people being able to have hope for the future. A vision where you turn on the faucet and clean water comes out, free from toxic waste. We have a state where we get $1 worth of value for the dollars that we send to Trenton. All of these things are things that we want, and we can have them if we all work together. But what we need is proven leadership and bedrock values that are consistent. I'm prepared to provide that leadership. Lucinda and I have been going up and down the state. People hunger for leadership. I'm prepared to give New Jersey the leadership it wants to lead us to our best days yet.
Congressman Corder.
Thank you. First, let me start out by saying that I suppose the International Award for flip-flopping should go to Congressman Florio, not for me. On automobile insurance, he was an advocate of the pro-life movement early in his career. He was a speaker. He took one position on the primary on the Garden State Parkway, another position today. He took one position in the primary with regard to school closing, or the bill to school takeover. He has a different position today. But I look at a different New Jersey than he does. I look at a New Jersey where we have tough laws to make sure that our people are safe in their streets. I look at a New Jersey that has real opportunity for our senior citizens, making sure that their property taxes don't go up, so they're not forced to leave their homes and go very far from where they live or where their children are. I see a New Jersey where our drivers can drive safely and also drive cheaply. I believe deeply that I have a solution. I don't want more of the same. I want a change on automobile insurance. He doesn't. Congressman Florio is part of the problem, and he wants more of the same. I want to make sure that our insurance companies are forced to compete. I want to make sure that we do something different there. We don't have bad drivers. We have bad laws. I see a New Jersey where our streets are safe. Our children have an opportunity to get a good education in good schools, irrespective of where those schools are, whether those schools happen to be in South Jersey or North Jersey, whether those schools happen to be in one part or the other. I see a New Jersey that's better than today. What I want to do is not tear down that which Tom Kean gave us. I want to build of it. I want to build on it. I want to improve it. I want to make sure that today's efforts, that today's goals are improved, and that tomorrow is in fact even better than today. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. This concludes the first of two mandated debates. Both of the candidates deserve your respect and our respect for their candor and their willingness to be in public service. It is a noble pursuit. Good luck to both of you, and thank you and good night.
I'm with Roger Ailes, the well-known GOP media consultant who is making Jim Corder's television commercials this fall and also coached Jim Corder a little bit over the weekend on debate performance. I thought it was a very interesting debate. I thought people on both sides could say that their guy did very well. Let's hear what Roger Ailes thinks of the debate.
Well, I think it's a new election campaign starting tonight. I think Jim Corder obviously won the debate, but I think that even more than that, I think that people got to look at Jim Florio, and it was sort of the old Jim Florio again when our guy talked about his mother and a father in a very touching way, and Jim Florio sort of sneered at him. I don't think that's going to go over very well.
If you can open up the shot here, we're joined by Congressman Robert Torricelli, who happened to have done some coaching of Congressman Jim Florio. We're talking about how the debate went. Roger Ailes says that Jim Corder won the debate, that it started a new phase of the campaign, and that he saw the old Jim Florio tonight. Tell us what you think, and if you would turn just a bit this way, Congressman.
Well, I suppose it wouldn't surprise you to hear that I think Jim Florio did very well, but for a very specific reason. The problem Jim Corder is going to have coming out of tonight is that he's now tried to cast himself in a way that simply isn't consistent with the facts. He must believe that we're not going to go now and look whether or not, in fact, he did cast these votes against the environment. Tomorrow morning, every reporter in New Jersey is going to go look up the facts. He did vote for tax increases. In fact, he voted for tax increases on a number of times, and the largest in history. He did, in fact, cast votes against the most important environmental legislation in our state's history. And I don't know how he's going to explain it tomorrow morning.
There were a lot of factual disagreements, and we are going to have to look to the press to settle who may have been right. People are interested in demeanor during a debate and seem to place a fair amount of value on demeanor. Let me ask each of you to comment on the demeanor of your candidate. It seemed to me that Corder was a little freer with the asides, and yet I heard some hissing during some of his answers on abortion, homosexuality. Somebody said he sounds like Nixon. Talk to me about how he did in terms of demeanor, and how Florio did.
Well, Jim Corder did very well. Of course, he was very comfortable. I think Jim Florio was, as usual, very stiff and very programmed. His answers sounded as if you pressed a button and they came out. He obviously had done some rehearsal, and I compliment you for the fine work you did in coaching him, because he certainly sounded coached. But I think that in reality, people vote for a person, a real person down inside. And when Jim Corder talked about his mom and dad,
you liked that moment.
I loved it. And Jim Florio rather...
You didn't think that was a screwball question?
No, listen, I'm used to the media asking screwball questions. It never bothers me when you guys ask screwball questions. I figure that's part of the game. But no, Jim Corder did extremely well, and I'll tell you the test. The test is very simple. We think Jim Corder did so well, we'd like to have a lot more debates with Mr. Florio. Now, I assume this man can speak for Mr. Florio, and if he can, we'd be quite happy to have more debates so that Jim Florio would lose again.
Let me tell you something about our state. You've run a lot of campaigns in the Deep South and in the Far West.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Well, let me tell you.
This is Northeast. I'm from Ohio.
This isn't Texas. This isn't some little state somewhere else in the country. Here, we don't just decide who's going to be governor by who's cute and who's flip. It's based on important values. It's where you are on important issues.
We think mother and father are important values in our society.
I know that you wrote all kinds of nice lines for Jim Corder, but tomorrow morning and on election day, people are going to want to know, where are you on car insurance? Where are you on real estate taxes? Have you voted all your life for a good education for our kids? Have you been there when we needed you for environmental protection? And your candidate was cute, and he had some good lines, but on those issues, your candidate's in trouble.
My candidate stopped offshore drilling on the coast of New Jersey. My candidate has a fine environmental record, and on those issues like taxes, I think Mr. Florio is going to have the problem.
Roger, you're talking to a member of Congress.
I understand that, and I'm trying to do it with all due respect.
We've got 14 members of Congress, and you're not listening. This isn't my evaluation or Jim Florio's evaluation. The League of Conservation Voters, our largest national environmental organization, rates your candidate with the worst environmental rating of anybody in federal office from the state of New Jersey.
Would you accept
the
that
worst.
Environmental rating is done by a group of people who are perhaps as far left as Mr. Florio is.
Would I believe the Sierra Club, or would I believe a Republican consultant? I'd believe the Sierra Club.
This has been very interesting, gentlemen. I wish we could keep going. This is debate 2 or spin 1. I'm not sure.
We'd both agree to if you'd like.
I'd be happy to.
We're out of time. Thank you both. I hope you felt your pupils did well tonight. Obviously, you do feel that way. This is Michael Aaron. I'm at Monmouth College, where Jim Florio and Jim Corder have just completed their first debate, first of 2 in this gubernatorial race. Let's go back to you in the studio, Ken.
Nice to see you.